What's up YouTube, welcome to CodAffection. In this React or Redux beginners tutorial, we will implement CRUD operations, insert, update, delete and retrieve with and without Redux from scratch. So please watch till the end of this video tutorial. So without further ado, let's get started with the topic. First of all, we will get started with creating React app inside this project folder. For that, we have to open command prompt from this same folder directory. So here is the shortcut. Just type cmd inside this folder path, then hit enter, so that we have opened the command prompt from the same folder directory. In order to create a React app, you can use this npm package create react app. Corresponding command will be something like this: npx space create app, the name of the app. The name of the app, it would be React CRUD. Depending upon your internet speed, it will take some time to complete this process, so please be patient. So here we have successfully created the app. As a result of that, you can see the newly created folder here. Now let's navigate inside this folder. Now I'm gonna open this project folder inside Visual Studio Code Editor. For that, you can do this code space period symbol. Hit enter. So here we have the brand new React application. Let me run this application inside the browser. For that, I will open this IDE terminal here. Then we just need to do this npm start. That will open up this application from the port number 3000 like this. So this is how the fresh React app looks like. Now let's look what we have inside this fresh application here. Inside this SRC, we have the index.js file, which is the root JavaScript file for React applications. And here you can see the default component app.js. So this div is responsible for the default view of the application here. Now let's discuss the main agenda or plan behind this application. For that, let me create a new file. I will name it as hint.txt. In order to demonstrate React CRUD operations with or without Redux, we will use the context of account transaction from a bank to bank that you might have seen in all of the money transaction mobile applications, even in Google Pay itself. So inside this application, we will implement CRUD operations on account transaction data like beneficiary account number, holder name, then IFSC or SWIFT code, and the amount to be transferred. So first of all, we will discuss how to implement the CRUD operations without Redux. Now inside this application, we will have two components. So they are transaction list and then transaction form. Transaction list component will be the parent component, and here is the corresponding child component. Inside this transaction list component, we will list all of the previous transactions, and inside this form component, we have to design a form to do the transaction. Since this is our first React CRUD operation, we are not going to use any of the API or database. We will be using state from these components, but those state will be reset to its initial state once we reload the page. So in order to avoid that situation, we will be using local storage. It is present inside the web browser itself. Data inside the local storage won't be lost even if you reopen your web browser. For now, that's all we need to store data from this CRUD operation. In upcoming tutorials, we can discuss how we can use Django RESTful API or ASP.NET Core Web API as a backend. So first of all, let's create these two components. First of all, we have transaction list.js. You can manually create the component class here. In most of the case, I will be using the extension for React snippets. You can see the snippet here. So here is the extension for React snippet. Okay, I have installed this in my system. Once you install the extension, the creation of components will be really handy. For example, if you want to create a component class, you can use this RCC. If you want to create a functional component, you can use this RFC. So let's create the component class here, transaction list. Instead of adding this export default here, I will do that at the end of the file here, export default transaction list. Sorry, I forgot to create components class here. So let's create that, components. Now let's move this into the new folder, components. Now let's create the form component, transaction form.js. Now let's create a component class using this snippet RCC. Now let's copy this. Okay, we don't need this here. Just export the class here. That's it. Currently, our boilerplate application looks like this. Now, I want to add few global CSS rules inside this index.css here. First of all, I will set the width to 50%, and then I will set the margin as auto. Also, I want to increase the font size. So font size 1.5. Now inside the app.js file here, I just want to replace this whole div with the transaction list component. Transaction list. If you click on this auto suggestion here, you don't have to import the component at the top. It will automatically add the import statement here. We don't need this logo anymore. Now back to the list component here. Here we just return a div. Inside the div, first of all, I will add the form component, transaction form. And just beneath the form component, we will have a horizontal line. After that, we have to list all of the transactions of transactions. And inside this transaction form, we have to return a form for React CRUD Operations. Now let me save all of these modifications and back to the app here. At the top, we will have a form for CRUD Operations. Below that, we will list all of the transactions. Now using this form component, we have to show a form. In order to store form data, we will be using state of this component. As you know, it is an object resides inside every React component. You can directly initialize this state just beneath the class, or you can use constructor of this class just like this constructor. And here we have to do this dot state is equal to an object. When we use component constructor, don't forget to call the super constructor. So this is also another way to initialize the state of a component. For now, I will use this initialization here. So let me remove this. Inside this state, let's have properties corresponding to each of the inputs that we want to show inside the form. So first of all, we have beneficiary account number. I will initialize it with empty string. And then we have IFSC code or Swift code, beneficiary name or beneficiary account holder name. And finally, we have the amount property. So these are the properties which is to be shown inside the form. Now let's design a form using these state properties. So instead of this div, we will have a form. In most of the form, I would like to prevent autocomplete from previously posted data. So I will set it as off here. Autocomplete is equal to off. Now let's add inputs for each of the properties, state properties. Name should be exactly similar to this state property here. So account number, then we will have the placeholder something account number. And then we have to bind the value property to this state property here, so that we can do like this: value is equal to this dot state dot be account number. When we bind an input control value to a state property, we also have to define or handle on change event. So on change is equal to this dot handle input change. Okay, that's it. We have not yet defined this function handle input change, so we will do that here. Handle input change. We are going to define this function using arrow function. First of all, name of the function handle input is equal to then body of the function. For this function, we have a single parameter, which is the default event parameter. So basically inside this function, we will update the corresponding property value inside the state here. So we can do that with this function set state. Inside this, we will just return an object with updated value of beneficiary account number. We don't want to hard code this property here. Instead, we will generalize this function like this. Here we have to provide the name of the property inside the state that we can retrieve from the name property of the input. So we can do this e.target, which is the input control from which this on change event is triggered. Dot name returns the name of the input control, which is same as that of the property inside the state. So when we define an input control, corresponding name should be exactly similar to this property here. Okay, this is equal to e.target.value. Sorry, instead of equal to symbol, we have to use colon here. So this value property will return the current value from the input control, and it will be updated into the state property here. Let me save all of these modifications. Let's look whether it is working or not. So here is the input control. Let me enter some random numbers. So it is perfectly working. Now let's do the same for remaining input controls. I want to add a line break here. We are not going to use any of the front-end style sheet like Bootstrap or Materialize CSS. We will keep this as simple as possible so that we can focus on the meat of the tutorial. Like this account number, we need 3 more input controls for remaining properties. So let me copy this and paste in below that 3 times. Now using the multi-cursor feature in Visual Studio Code Editor, I will update the corresponding properties here. So first of all, I will add the multiple cursor for this name and value property here. You just need to hold Alt, then place the cursor at the end of these properties, and then let's use the backspace, and here we have to type IFSC. Also we have to update this placeholder to IFSC code. Now let's do the same for rest of the input controls. After these input controls, we need a submit button. So input type is equal to submit. Inside the button, we will have this text submit. And sorry, instead of input, we have to use button. Let me save this back to the app. So here's the form with required input controls. You can see an irregular space between these input controls here. I think in order to correct that, we also have to increase the font size like we have done here. We have to apply this font size for input controls also. So input comma button, we can copy this CSS rule, just hold Control, then drag this here, save, back to the app. That's it. Now let's look how to submit this form. Inside this form component here, we just need to add the event on submit, and we will handle this event inside the function handle submit. Now let's define the function like we have done for handle input change function. Handle submit is equal to, for this function also we have a single parameter event. First of all, we have to prevent the default behavior of an HTML form. For that, we can do this prevent default. Inside the form submit event, we have to save the transaction details. We have to save those transaction details into the local storage. Apart from that, we have to save the array of transactions either inside this list component or inside the form component state object. And we will save the list of transactions inside the list component state object, because we have to display all of the transactions inside the list component here. If the child component form needs that array, we can pass that through the props of the component. That we can do later. For now, inside the store of the transaction list component, we have a list property, which is an array to store all of the transactions. Okay, so inside this component, list component, First of all, I will initialize the state here. State is equal to an object, and here we have the array list. For now, I will just initialize that with an empty array, even though we have to fetch that transaction array from local storage. As per the plan, whatever the CRUD operation we do, we will update the data inside the local storage and inside the state object. After reloading the page, the state will be reset to its initial state. So we have to fetch the previous data from local storage once we start our application. In order to fetch the list that is already there inside the local storage, I will define a new function here, return list. For this function, we don't have any parameter. First of all, we will check whether the local storage is empty or not. So we can do this local storage dot get item, and we will use this token to save the transactions. Token name will be transactions itself. Transactions. If it is equal to null, meaning there is no data from previous operations, we will initialize the local storage like this, set item, and here we have to use the same key. So let me copy this, and we will initialize that with an empty array. So here we have initialized the local storage to an empty array if it is null. Also, you must remember this, you just can't save the JSON objects into local storage. It only stores string data. So first of all, before saving data into local storage, we have to convert that into a string. So I will do this json.stringify. It will convert the JSON object into string. Finally, from this function, we have to return the JSON object. During saving data into local storage, we will convert the JSON object into string, and when we retrieve that, we have to do the opposite operation, which is parse. json.parse local storage. We can use this. Let me copy this. So this will convert the JSON string into JSON object. So from this function, we can get the array, and we will use the return array to initialize this list array here. This dot return list. Okay, so here we have properly initialized the state of this component. Now back to the form component. When users submit the form, we have to save the transaction details into this parent component list array from the state. Since this list is inside this parent component state, we have to do the same operation inside the parent component itself. So I will define the function on add or edit. For this function, we have a single parameter data. First of all, inside this function, we will retrieve all of the transactions that we have made so far. List is equal to this dot return list. Now inside this function, we have to insert the transaction data into this array here. So we just need to call the function list from the array. So push, and here we have to pass the data. Finally, after any of the CRUD operations, we have to update the local storage and the state array list. So I will do that here. So let me copy the same statement from here. Inside this, we have to pass the list with new object. We also have to update the state like this. This dot set state function can be called, and we have to pass the list. So list is equal to list from this function. Using ES6 syntax, you can simplify this statement like this, just pass list. So here we have defined the function on add or edit. Now we have to call this function inside the form submit event from this function here. So we can do this. We will pass the function like this. On add or edit is equal to this dot on add or edit. We have passed this on add or edit function into the transaction form component as on add or edit. In order to avoid the confusion, I have given the same name. In order to access this function from the child component here, inside the submit event, we have to call the function. So this dot props, then we can call the function on add or edit. into this function, we have to pass the data from the form controls here that we can retrieve from the component state object. So this dot state can be passed here. So using probes, we can access data that passed from the parent component. Now let me save all of these modifications, and now let's try to insert a new transaction here. So here you can see an error. This dot return list is not a function. And here we have the hint. In the initial pass, we might need to construct the instance. I think it is due to this array function here. Instead of array function, we have to define the normal function. Since we are calling this inside the initialization of the state, we have to use the normal function. Now let me save this, back to the app. Let's try to insert a new record. Before that, let's check what we have inside the local storage. You can see the application local storage inside this application tab, and here we have the application port 3000. Now let's try to insert a new transaction. I will provide a random account number here, an IFSC code, and amount will be something 500. Sorry, here we have an error. Inside the form component handle input change, we may have some problem. Yes, here we have misspelled the property name. Back to the app, account number, then IFSC code, beneficiary name, submit, boom. You can see the exactly same inside the local storage. So the same object should be there inside the transaction list component state here. Now let's look how to display all of the transactions that we made in past inside the list component here. In order to do that, we will have a new table here, HTML table. Inside that, we don't need a T header. I will just go for T body here. And here we have to have transaction TR element as much as transactions that we have inside the list array here. So in order to do that, we can make use of the map function from JavaScript. So I will do this dot state. We have the array list, and we can call the map function here. Inside that, I will define a callback function like this. Inside the function, we have two parameters, item, which is the transaction details, and the index of the item. And here we have to return a TR element with corresponding details. Now let's add TD element for each of the details. Item dot be account number. Like this, I want to show two more properties. So let me copy this and pasting below that. Be name, which is the beneficiary name, then corresponding amount. And there is one more thing left. In React, when we show items like this through iteration, we have to have a key property for such elements. So we can do this. Key is equal to index. So we have to set the key property for such iterated elements with unique value for each of the elements. So let me save this and back to the app. That's it. Now for the proper alignment of this table, let's add few CSS rules inside the index.css here. So we just add border to the table elements. Back to the app. So that's all we need. We have border around the table columns. Now let's look how to implement edit operation or update operation. Normally in a real world application, for any record we will have a primary key to uniquely identify the record. In case of this application here, we have a simple logic. So in case of primary key, we will use the index of the item from the array here. Okay, so we have to save the index of currently processing data. In case of a new transaction, its value will be -1, and in case of an existing record which is to be updated, corresponding index will be stored inside the application. What I mean by that, inside this list component state object, we will have one more property, current index. Okay, so current index. Initially I will set it as -1, current index, which is equal to -1, meaning we have a fresh form, so we can do the insert operation. Now let's go for the edit or update operation. For that, I will add an extra column with edit button here. So back to the app, let me add one more TD cell here. Here we will have a button. Button text will be edit. When user click on the button, we can handle that here. On click is equal to this dot handle edit. As we have discussed, for edit operation we have to have the corresponding record index to uniquely identify the record. So we have to pass the index here. Now let's define the function handle edit. So we can do that with arrow function. Handle edit is equal to, we have a single parameter index, and here we will just do this dot set state, and we will update the current index here. Current index is equal to the past index from the event. Sorry, here we have a problem inside the onClick event here. When we pass data into the event functions, we have to do this. We will call those functions in another function like this dot handle edit. Okay, let me save this. When we click on this edit button, corresponding index 0 will be stored inside the state object, and based on the index we have to show the corresponding record details inside the form here. How we can do that? This is inside the form component and this is inside the list component. Of course, we can pass that through the props of the component. So I will just do that here. Current index is equal to this dot state dot current index. Now we can do this inside this form component here. For previous insert operation, we have directly initialized this state like this. For edit operation, we have to populate the values based on the current index that we have passed here. So in order to solve this, I will define another function here, return state object. I will use the normal function here instead of arrow functions because we are using this function for initializing this state object, so it would be better to use normal functions. So first of all, we will check the current index. So we can do that like this dot props dot, if current index is equal to -1, we will just return an object like this. Okay, so we can return. Now let me move this object from here, and here we have the else part. Here we have to return corresponding transaction details for the given current index. In order to do that, we also need this list array from the list component. So I will pass that here. So don't be concerned about this component communications. We will fix that inside the Redux. We will have a better architecture once we implement Redux. So we can do this dot state dot list can be passed here, and now we can do this return this dot props dot list, and from this list we have to return corresponding object based on the index. So let me pass the index here. So this function will return state object based on the current index from the parent component. Now we can call this here this dot return state object, but that is not enough. We can't initialize state like this, so we will do this. This is also an object. Now we will use this spread operator so that the properties from the returned object from this function will become the property of this object here. So this is how we can dynamically initialize the state of a component. And back to the app here. Now let's try the edit operation. If you click on it, you can see the corresponding transaction details inside the form here. So what happens behind the scene? Initially, the corresponding index will be -1. So when we click on the edit button here, of course it will update the index, current index here, but inside this application, this function will only be called during the force initialization of the component. After that, this function won't be called as per the code here. So we have to manually identify changes inside the parent component, and based on that we have to update the state object here. So that we can do inside the React component lifecycle, which is component did update. Component did update. So this lifecycle event will be invoked whenever there is a change inside this state of this component, and also if there is any change inside the props data that we have passed from the parent, so which is current index and list. So inside this event we will update the state of the component. Set state function can be called, and here also we will do the same. Return state object function can be called. But there is a problem. This lifecycle event will be called whenever there is a change inside this component state, or there is a change inside the props data that is passed from the parent component, which is current index and list of transactions. We have to update the state of the component here whenever there is a change inside these data, list or current index. We don't have to update this state whenever there is a change inside this state, which occurs as per the handle input change here. Whenever we make a change inside any of the control values, we will update this component state here, and there also this component did update function will be called, and this way this lifecycle event will be called infinitely. So in order to prevent this situation, we can do this. Inside this event function, we can have the parameter previous props. It will have the props data from previous state, and here we can add this if condition. Inside the if clause here, we will check whether the current index or list is changed or not. So we can do this dot current index is changed props dot current index, or there is a change inside the list which is passed from here. So let me copy this and pasting here. Instead of current index we have list, and we will check the length. Okay, so if there is any change in list or current index, then only we will update the state of the component. So let me save this and back to the app here. Let's try this edit operation again. So that's it. After making required changes inside this form, user will submit the form here. In that case also, this same form submit event will be called. So we have to handle this inside the parent function on add or edit here. So inside this function, in order to identify whether we have an insert or update operation, we can make use of the state property current index. So I will do this if state current index, if it is equal to -1, we can do the insert operation, otherwise we can go for update operation. In order to update the corresponding record, we just need to do this list, and here we have the index. So let me copy this, and which is equal to the data. Inside the data object, we will have the updated value from corresponding input controls. And finally, we will store the updated list in local storage and inside the component state. Back to the app here. Let's try to edit this record. Beneficiary name will be John Smith. Amount will be something 900. Submit. Boom. So here we have updated the record accordingly. So far, we forgot to implement the form reset operation here. that we can do inside this on add or edit function itself. But how we can do that? You see, inside this form component we have this component did update. Whenever there is a change in parent component state properties, current index and list, this child component state will be updated according to the statement here we have given. We will update the child component state according to the object that is returned from this function here. If the current index is -1, it will return a state object with reset values. So in order to reset the form here, we just need to update the current index into -1. So that we can do inside this statement here itself, current index as -1. That's it. Save this back to the app. Let's try to update this record again. I will change this account number to something easily recognizable. Submit the record. Boom. Now finally, let's implement the delete operation inside this React CRUD operation. As you know, we will start with adding a delete button inside the table. So let me copy this line here and I will paste that below. I will change this text to delete. We have to define another function for this. Click event here, handle delete. So we have handle delete, a function with a single parameter index. First of all, we have to retrieve the list like we have done inside this function here. So let me copy this. In order to delete an item from list inside JavaScript, we just need to call this splice function here. As a first parameter, we have to pass the index from where we have to delete the item and then number of items to be deleted. Finally, we have to save the updated data into local storage and state of the component like we have done here. So let me copy this. So that's all about delete operation. Let me save this back to the app here. Now let's try to delete this record here. Boom. That's it. So far we have implemented React CRUD operation without Redux. Now let's try to do the same React CRUD operation with Redux. Before starting this discussion, I would like to thank your PayPal donations for my previous works. In order to make more helpful and quality tutorials like this, you can also support me through PayPal donation. I have given the link in video description and inside the first comment of the video. Before adding Redux into this React application, let me insert few transactions into this application so that the list of transactions will help me to get started with Redux easily. So I will be back after adding few transactions into this application here. So here we have inserted few transactions. First of all, let's discuss why we need Redux and what is wrong with the current method that we have done here. Currently we have designed the form inside form component with its state object. We are not sharing that with any other component. But in case of the parent component list component, we have list and current index which is shared to this child component here. So let's look what we have shared inside this application. Inside this render function, you can see we have shared the state properties, current index and list, and one function on add or edit. So we have shared list, current index, and the function on add or edit. As you might have noticed, at various stages of the app development, we are forced to share these properties or functions. When it comes to bigger, practical, complex applications, we may have to share a long list of properties or functions to be shared. So in order to avoid this problem, we will be using the state management package Redux. So let's look how it solves this problem with Redux. Let me copy this same structure from here and let's paste that here. When it comes to Redux, we don't have to share properties or functions like this. So let me remove this from here. In case of Redux, we will have a Redux store. Inside that, we can add this list and current index. So let me remove this component state from here. So the data inside this Redux store can be accessed from any React component. First of all, Redux is an npm package. Okay, it has nothing to do with React. So in order to act as an intermediate, we have another package called React Redux. Okay, so we have to install these two packages. Basically in Redux we have action, then reducer and a store. Actually this action is an object which represents an action or an operation. In case of reducer, it works based on the action. On the action provided to reducer, it will define how to update current store data, and inside the store we will save data which can be accessed throughout the application. So this is how it works. From our component, in order to make an operation, for example, if we want to do an insert operation, this is what we do. We will call the function dispatch from Redux. As a parameter to this dispatch, we have to pass an action. It has the operation and data for insert operation. It will reach up to the reducer. Based on the action or operation that we have passed here, it will update the state. So in this case, for insert operation, there will be a new object added to this list. So that operation will be done inside the reducer, and then we can access the same updated store inside our application. So let's look how to add Redux into this React application here. So first of all, we have to install these two packages here. So let me open one more terminal here. In order to install the npm package, we can do this npm i for install, then -s for save. First of all, we have Redux, then React Redux, hit enter. So here we have successfully installed the packages. As a first step towards implementing Redux into this application, first of all we have to create the Redux store. For that, here we have the root JavaScript file index.js. First of all, we have to import create store function from Redux. We have to import from Redux. We will import create store. In previous method also, first of all we have checked whether the local storage is null or not. If it is null, we will initialize that with empty array. So let me copy this and I will paste that here. Then I will initialize a variable with required properties inside the Redux store. So let initial state an object. Inside that we need current index. Initially it will be -1. And then we have the list array which we can retrieve from the local storage. So json.parse. Let me copy this. Now let's create the Redux store. Var store is equal to create store. Function can be called. As a first parameter to this function, we have to pass the reducer, which we have mentioned here. We have not yet created reducer, so I will just keep the first parameter as empty. As a second parameter, we can pass the object with initial values that we want inside our store. For now, as a first parameter, I will just pass an empty object like this. In order to access this store throughout the application, we have to use the provider component from Redux. So first of all, let me add the import statement here. React Redux. We have to import provider. Now we have to enclose this whole application with the provider component so that we can do inside the render function here, provider. Okay, now let's enclose the app with provider. Now here we can pass the store that we have just created here. So we can do this. Store is equal to store. Now as a second step, I want to create the actions that is required for the CRUD operations inside the application. I will create a new folder here, actions. Inside that I will create a file, transaction actions. Inside this file, we just need to return an object representing each action inside the application. So first of all, we have the insert operation. So we will define that like this: constant insert is equal to, this is a function with a single parameter, data, and inside that we will return an object. It has two properties. Type is equal to insert. So with this property we will identify what is the operation, and then we have payload. You can name whatever you want. With this payload property we can pass data required for the processing of this operation passed here. So I will just pass the data here. So okay, in case of insert operation, it would be the form data that we have submitted. We will see that in a bit. Like this, we need 3 more actions. So let me copy this and then I will just paste that here. First of all, we have update action. Type will be update, and then we have delete. Here you can see an error because it is already a keyword in JavaScript. So I will just replace this small d with capital D. Type will be delete. In case of delete operation, instead of data parameter, I would be using some meaningful parameter name. It would be index. Finally, we have one more operation that you can see inside this list component here. Edit or update operation, we have to change the current index. So whatever operation which change the state of component, we have to have a corresponding action here. So I will name the corresponding action as update index. Corresponding type will be update index. Parameter will be index. So that's it. So that's all we have for action. Now let's define the reducer. For that also I will define another function, reducers. Inside the file I will create a new JavaScript file, transaction reducer. So basically it is a function. I will name it as transaction reducer with 2 parameters, state and the action. This state parameter will have the data that we have passed to the store. So this reducer is invoked when we invoke this dispatch here, and here we will pass the action, and that action can be accessed through this parameter here. So basically inside this reducer we will have a switch. Based on the type of operation that we have passed through the action, we will decide what type of operation to be done. So action dot type is the value which is to be checked here. First of all, we have insert operation. For insert operation, we have to push a new value into the array. So first of all, I will retrieve the array from our local storage like this: json.parse local storage dot get item transactions, and inside this we can do this list dot, and here we can call the push function. Into that we have to pass the data, and the data is passed through the property payload from our action dot payload. And finally we have to update the local storage, set item transactions, and then we have to convert this JSON object into string. And finally we have to return an object which is to be replaced in our Redux store. So I will just remove this break since we have a return statement here. Return list is equal to list. In short, we can do this list, and then we can also pass current index, and the current value of index can be accessed from this state parameter like this, state dot current index. Like this insert operation, we have to do the same for remaining actions. So let me copy this and pasting 3 times below. Now let's start with update, and here we have to update the corresponding item from the list. Here we have to update the corresponding record with current index, so we can access that from state dot current index, which is equal to the data that we have passed through the payload here. Action dot payload Okay, and then we have to do the same for this update operation also, and then we have the delete operation. We will call this slice function, and index is passed through this payload here, action.payload, and the number of items to be deleted, which is 1, and we have to return the updated store values. Like we have done before, in order to reset the form, we have to set this current index as -1. I have to do the same for previous operations also. And finally, we have this operation update index. Here we don't have to update anything from local storage, so I will just remove this, and here we just have to set the index to -1. And finally, inside this default case here, we'll just return this state as it is, return state. So based on the operation, make the changes and we will return the updated state. This state value will be stored or replaced in our Redux store. So we have defined all of these: action, reducer, and store. Oh yes, we forgot to pass the reducer that we have created into this create store here. We have to pass this transaction reducer here. So transaction reducer, if you click on this, corresponding import statement should be added at the top here. Sorry, it's not working, so you can add the import statement here. Reducers, and we have the transaction reducer there, and from that we have to import transaction reducer. It is a function that we have defined inside this file here. Sorry, here we have to export this function. So export. In a real world application, we will have more than one reducer. In that case, we will combine all of those reducer and we will pass that here. For now, we can skip with this reducer. Let me save all of the modifications and back to the application. So we have the same working application as before. We have not changed anything inside the components. Now let's try to do the React CRUD operations with Redux. First of all, let's look how to access this Redux store inside our components. There are two methods. One is using the subscription and another one is using props. In most of the components, we will use the props method to access the Redux store. So let's look how we can do that. As we have discussed, Redux is an independent package. In order to interact with Redux from our React application, we have installed the package React Redux. Now, in order to access data from Redux store, we will make use of React Redux package like this. First of all, we have to import connect from React Redux. React Redux, and here we have to import connect function. We can use this connect method while exporting the component here. We will just do this. We will call this connect function here, and then we will pass this component here. Now, as we have discussed, here we are going to use the props method to access the Redux store. For that, we will create a function called map state to props. Okay, it is a function with single parameter state, meaning the state inside the Redux store. Here we will map the data from Redux store into this component props. Okay, like this. Return an object. There will be a property in our component props which is linked to the property from our Redux store list. Okay, you can link the state property with whatever property name. In order to avoid the confusion, I will use the same name here. We just need to pass this function as a first parameter inside this function here. First of all, I want to display this list of transactions using the Redux method. As per the index.js, we already retrieved the transactions from the local storage into Redux store here. Now we can access that inside this list component using the props property list. So let's change this here. Props.list property can be accessed to retrieve the transactions that we have. Let me save this and back to the app here. That's it. Here we are rendering this list of transactions from Redux store. Now let's try to implement this delete operation with Redux. Here we have the delete button. we don't have to do anything here. Inside this function handle delete, inside this function we can remove all of these codes here. We have to call this dispatch function with corresponding action. So let's look various ways to do that. So here is the first method. We can call the dispatch function as we have mentioned inside the hints here. So this dot props dot dispatch function can be called. Inside that we have to pass the action that we have inside this transaction actions file. So let's add the corresponding import statement here. Import. We have to import that from actions where we have this file transaction actions. We want to import all of them, and I will give the alias as actions. Now inside this dispatch function we can do this actions dot. For delete operation we have this action delete, so we can do this delete. Into that we have to pass the index. Okay, back to the app here. Let's try to delete one record. Sorry, it's not working. Is there any error? No, there is nothing. So let's have a look where we went wrong. Okay, so here we have the reducer case for delete. So here we have the problem. We have misspelled splice. Let me save this. Let's try to delete this record again. Boom. So here we have implemented the delete operation with Redux. Now this is not the recommended way of calling dispatch in a component. Instead of calling like this, we have to map actions into props like we have done to this state properties here. First of all, we will define a function like we have done before, map dispatch to props. For this function we have a single parameter dispatch, and here is the function body. We will return an object, and let's provide the key delete transaction is equal to another function. Don't worry, I will simplify this to a simple method. We can call the dispatch function here dispatch. Inside that we have to provide the corresponding action. Actions dot delete function can be called. Here we have to pass the index, so I will add the parameter here index, and hence we can pass the same here index. Sorry, we have misspelled constant. Now we just need to pass this function as a second parameter inside this connect function here. Okay, now we just need to do this dot props dot delete transaction. Here we just need to pass the index. Okay, this is what we have done. We have called the dispatch with the action delete by passing the index, and this function is mapped to this function delete transaction, which can be accessed through the props like we have accessed the store properties. Now we can even simplify this function once again. For that we have to import bind action creators from Redux. Don't worry, we will simplify this even more. Redux, we have to import bind action creators. Okay, I will explain what it does once we add this function into the component here. We will call the function here bind action creators. Into this function we can pass this object here. Now we don't have to call the dispatch function here. We just need to map like we have mapped the store properties. Okay, we just need to map like this. As a second parameter to this bind action creators, we can pass the dispatch. Okay, we don't have to change anything while calling the function here. So what is happening behind the scene? This function will wrap up the dispatch function around this action delete, and this way we can avoid calling dispatch for every future mapping inside this object here. I hope you understood the point. Now let's move on. So far we have implemented retrieve and delete operation with Redux. Now let's try to do the CRUD operations insert and update with Redux. That we can do inside the transaction form component. First of all, we have to map this dispatch and state to props like we have done here. So let me copy all of these two functions and I will paste that here. Now let me copy all of these import statement from here and I will paste that here. Now let's do the same like we have done for list component. We will call the connect function here. As a first parameter, we can pass the map state to props, then map patch to props, and then we can pass this component. Here we already mapped the list property. Now let's map the current index also. Current index is equal to state dot current index. Inside this form component, instead of delete action, we may have to use insert and update actions. We can do this. Insert transaction is equal to actions dot insert can be mapped, and for update operation we can do this. Update transaction is equal to actions dot update. So here we have mapped everything to props. Now let's update the form submit event here. Instead of calling this on add or edit function, first of all we will check this if this dot props dot current index, if it is equal to -1, we can dispatch the insert action. So this is how we do this. This dot props dot insert transaction can be called. Into that we have to pass the state, this dot state. For designing this form here, we have used this form transaction form component state. We are not passing or sharing that to any other component, so we will stick with the normal component state for this form. In order to pass the current values from the form, we can use the component state here. Okay, don't confuse with the Redux store. In a practical application, we'll be using some different techniques like ref or Redux forms, etc. We will discuss that in upcoming tutorials. For now, we will use the normal component state. And inside this else part, we have to do the update operation. So we can call the update transaction function here. Update transaction, that's it. Now inside this lifecycle event, we don't have to change anything. Inside this return state object and inside the component lifecycle event component did update, we have used props.currentIndex and props.list. It will be mapped to the Redux store property as per the configuration here. So everything inside this form component is working under Redux store. So we can remove the parent component communication to the child component here. We don't have to pass any of these. Let me save this and back to the application here. Let's try to insert a new transaction. Submit the record. Boom. So here we have inserted the record with Redux store. So here we have implemented React insert with Redux. Now let's try to edit the record. Click on edit. It is not working because we have not changed the corresponding code here inside the transaction list. When we click on edit, this function will be called. In that case, we have to call the dispatch with this action update index. So first of all, let's map that action here. Update transaction index is equal to actions dot update index. That's it. Now inside the function, we can do this props dot update transaction index, and here we can pass the index. Back to the app. Now let's try the edit operation again. It's not working, something went wrong. Inside the reducer, here we have the corresponding case. Yeah, here we have the error. We have to set this using the payload. Action dot payload. Back to the app, click on edit button. So here we have populated corresponding record. Let's explain the steps involved. As per the mapping, we will call the dispatch function with the update index action. So it will return an object with corresponding index. So it will reach up to this reducer, and inside this update index case, it will update the store current index. Since the current index is changed inside the store, we already mapped the corresponding current index to the component props. So it will invoke this lifecycle event. The component state will be populated with corresponding transaction details, and hence here we have the proper details. So here we have the first record. Now let's try to update this amount, submit the record. Nothing works. there should be some stupid mistake from my side. So let's check that. It is always been there in reducer, so let's check that. Yes, we have misspelled update here. Sorry, my bad. Update, save, back to the app. Let's try to update the record again with amount 600, submit the record, boom. So that's all. Now back to the application, we can remove unused code from our application. We don't need this component, list component state here. So let me remove that. We don't need this function which is used for the initialization of the state. We don't need this add or edit. So I hope here we have a clean code since we have kept everything at its proper position. I have uploaded this project React CRUD operation with and without Redux in GitHub Repository. I have given the link in video description and inside the first comment of the video. That's it guys. Here we have implemented React CRUD operations with Redux and without Redux. Hope you have understood everything that we have covered today. Don't be hesitated to ask in comment section below. If you found this video really helpful, please like and share this video with your friends and colleagues so that they can benefit from this. Have a nice day. Bye.